Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. It is so fantastic to see all of you. If you can hear me and you can see me okay, give me a thumbs up on your end. It is how I know all the tech and audio and all that is working because sometimes with this stuff, you just never know. So if you can see me and hear me, either type in a yes in the comments or just give me a thumbs up so I know everything is working beautifully. So I wanted to say welcome. I'm thrilled that you are here. Now, I wanted to say before we even get started with today's topic that this was a session that was originally scheduled with the author of Radical Candor, Radical Respect, Kim Scott. But due to some unforeseen circumstances, we've had to reschedule that session. So I was debating whether or not we should continue on with today's scheduled event, which I know many of you have carved out the time to join me and talk about all things communications. So, what I'm going to be doing today instead, which I think is kind of awesome and really fun, is I'm going to turn today's session into a solo Q&A on all things communications. But even above that, I'm going to make sure that we are going to be answering what I consider the top 10 must know communication tips to really build that confidence in the workplace. Now, for many of you, you might know who I am. If not, I'll do a quick intro and then I'll share why this is going to be the topic today. So, my name is Jessica Chen, and I host these Soulcast Media live events every other week or so. And we usually have a really amazing guest, such as Kim Scott, join us and we talk about all things career and communications. Now, prior to starting Soulcast Media, I used to be a television journalist. So I used to be on TV every day reporting the news. And it's funny because when I was a journalist on TV, when I first started, I was not a great communicator. And I think part of it is because I'm fairly introverted, pretty quiet and shy. And as you can imagine, when you go into this like really loud industry, it's really easy for you to, struggle and feel like, how do I use my voice? That's what I thought a lot when I first started. Now, funny enough, because I did start in news, I felt like there was no better place to learn how to improve my communication skills. So after about 10 years in that industry and after winning an Emmy award at the ABC station in San Diego, California, I had this like career epiphany where I was like, wait a second. Yes, I could continue on TV and continue this career, but there's actually so much that I learned as a journalist on about communications that I can teach it to professionals. So I left news, I started Soulcast Media, and we've been around for about 5, 6 years now. I cannot believe it. And I'm so proud to say that I've trained over 2 million people how to become that confident speaker, communicator, presenter in the workplace. I also have a book coming out this summer. We're less than 3 months out. It's called Smart, Not Loud: How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons. I'm going to share details soon. So, this is all to say, when I was thinking about, well, if we can't have a guest on today, how can I make this a very fruitful session for you? And I was going through the list of the most common questions I get. People either emailing us, writing in LinkedIn, or just any way people reach out to us asking us about communications. And I was like, wait a second, let's do a fun Q&A today. So that's what I have in store for you. And I just wanted you to know that even though I have these 10 questions, which I'm going to pull up on the screen shortly, if you during this, or you're like, wait a second, I have a question myself. I want Jessica to help, help me tackle this issue. You all have access to the chat function, which I know many of you are using right now. So I want you to know that this is for you. So we don't have to go through the 10 questions, and I'm going to go through them in order. But again, we don't have to do that. If you have a question and I'm like, yeah, that's a great question, let me answer it and we'll see how it goes. Now, today's session, it's going to go by fast. It's going to be about 40 minutes or so. So be sure to, take down notes, be engaged this whole time because this session is for you. So you're here, we're talking about all things communication. So let's get started. So the first question that I'm going to pull up is one of the most, let's say, most requested topics. And this one has to do with all things public speaking. Now, who here has nerves when it comes to public speaking? You can let me know in the chat function, but let me tell you, Public speaking is probably one of the most uncomfortable feelings for most people. Why? Because it is very unnatural to do. It's very unnatural to stand in front of a group of people, whether it's two, three, or 30 people, and have them all stare at you, and you just standing there thinking, oh my gosh, okay, please don't mess up. Please don't forget. And it's like, the material, like you've put together that deck, right? But it's like for some reason, now that people are looking at you, it's like your mind goes blank. Yes, I know some of us feel this way. So the first question that I want to answer, it's this one. How do I overcome public speaking nerves? So here's the thing. When I first started out, I was terrified myself of giving presentations. Whenever somebody would be like, "Hey, who wants to give a presentation?" Like I remember being in school, trust me, I was never the one who would raise my hand. Yes, I would see like maybe my classmates, my colleagues, the people who, are just very extroverted, very naturally confident. They'll be like, "Yeah, I'll do a quick presentation." And I was like that quiet person on the side. So, this is to say that I think for many of us, if this is something that you struggle with, I don't think the nerves ever really, truly 100% go away. And let me tell you why. Even though you feel like maybe you don't feel nerves because you are very familiar with your team, or maybe you've done this presentation many times with your client, or you've worked on this deck for a really long time. Nerves often happen because our environment feels different. Maybe we're now talking to people in a new environment with a new deck we're creating. And I think it's that newness that can cause us to have those nerves pop up. So, what I mean is, you got to get okay with it. You got to learn how to manage it. Now, a lot of people are like, well, what does that even mean? Like, manage it. So, I, it's not something that I wish that there was something where I can be like, here, take this or drink this, and you will get rid of all those nerves, and you'll feel like superwoman, superman. But I really think it goes a long way where before you are about to go up, don't try to like cram and be like, okay, these are all the things I want to talk about. I think one of the great things to do is to sit there maybe a minute or two in silence and just breathe. This is so effective because it calms your brain, it calms your heart, it calms maybe the butterflies going on in your stomach. And while you're doing this, you are telling yourself, "Wait a second. I I did practice this. I know this. If I remember and trust myself, then all those nerves, that overwhelming sense of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? Right? Like those are not necessarily helpful thoughts. Instead, you want to say, no, I got this. I know the material. And if I stumble over a word, because that can happen, I just got to keep going. These are the positive things that I would want you to tell yourself every time you're about to give a presentation and you feel like maybe your palms are getting sweaty, your stomach is churning. Because again, it's not about waiting for those nerves to 100% go away. Many times it won't 100% go away. Sometimes it just stays there. But sometimes it'll get better as you just now start talking, right? You just got to get into the flow of things. So, keep this in mind. Breathing, positive self talk, and just knowing and trusting yourself that you have this. Hey, even record me giving you this is almost like a pep talk. Just, you know, remember, Jessica saying to you, you got this. Don't worry about it and just trust the process. And here's my favorite tip. This is the golden nugget that I want to end with this question. Even though you might be presenting to your managers, directors, clients, people who you're like, I gotta impress, right? Because oftentimes it is that case. Like I want them to be impressed with this presentation or this information. I want you to not focus on their title. So do not think, oh, this is a room full of senior executives. This is a room full of potential clients that I must make an impression on. No, I want you to think I'm having a conversation with Jessica, with Lorraine, with Stephanie, with Bob. I want you to humanize this experience. That is the key. And I guarantee when you can humanize the experience and see the people in your audience as just people, it really also can reduce those nerves that you might feel. Okay. All right, let's move on to the second question that I want to get to today. And it still has to do with presentation. If you can tell, I get a lot of questions about presentations. So, this one is, how do I start off my presentations? So, when you are crafting your presentation, the number one most important thing you got to think about is this: who's my audience? And what do they care about? Because even though you might know the information, you might be the subject matter expert, you might be studying this, you've been working on this project for months. Even though you might know it in and out, you have to think about, does my audience need to know the amount of detail that I know? What is it that they really care about? Do they just want high level points or do they want context? This is a question that you have to ask yourself before you even put pen to paper when you're putting together your presentation. You know, that feeling of when you have like a blank deck in front of you, you're like, okay, what do I write? What do I put? Right? It's always thinking about your audience. And here's the thing, you can make the exact same presentation, like the topic can be the same, but how you start it off and how you deliver it to this group of people needs to be tailored a little bit differently when you're presenting to this group of people. And that's the key. I think many of us, perhaps it's because we don't think about it, or because oftentimes we're like, we just don't have time. We never give ourselves that moment to think, wait a second, I know this is the topic I'm presenting on, but how do I tailor it a little bit differently? And it doesn't have to be a complete transformation, which I know can feel overwhelming, especially when most of us are busy. But it's just really thinking about, what's the objective here? What do I want people to take away? And then identifying 2 to 3 key points. That's it. 2 to 3 key points that you want them to go, ah, this is what I want them to know. Because what I often see is when people do present, a lot of times they have all this information, and I call it, they're just brain dumping everything at once. Your audience, they start to feel like, whoa, like this is a lot. Or when you're talking, you're jumping from here to here to here, and there's not this like fluidity and connection. So that's why I say, if you want to think about putting pen to paper, just think about simplifying it and pick just 2 to 3 points you really want them to know and remember. So then the question is, how do I start off my presentation? So I'm going to share one of my favorite presentation frameworks. And when I share this with you, feel free to write it down, because this is a way of starting off your presentation that works every time. I use this myself every time I give presentations, and I give presentations a lot. So think about this as, all right, you've already created your presentation. You're there in the meeting, where it's online or it's in person, and you are standing there. The person introduces you and you're like, okay, now it's my turn. It's time to go. The first thing that I want you to say when you first open your mouth is, I'm really thrilled to be here with you all today. That's it. Just say those words. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today, or I'm excited to be spending the morning with you all, or I'm excited to dive into this presentation. Any of those few sentences when you first start out is a great way to start off your presentation. Why? Because you're setting the tone. When you use keywords like I'm excited, I'm looking forward, I'm thrilled, it is a positive, right? Those are positive words, and it gets people looking forward to hearing you talk. That's it. So after you say, I'm thrilled to be here with you all today, I'm going to be talking about A, B, and C. That's your second sentence. A, B, and C, of course, is the topic you are going to be presenting. I'm going to be talking about how we did in Q1 this year, and I'm going to give you a roadmap of what we think we're going to be planning, or what our forecast is for Q2. You see, it's just one sentence. Now, a lot of times people say, well, they know what I'm going to be talking about. Maybe the person who just introduced me said that. But here's the thing, you're the one presenting. You want to be the one to introduce the topic yourself. And it's not about being long winded or even starting to dive into the content. You're not diving into the content just yet. You're setting the stage to let people know, oh, okay, yes, this is what Jessica is talking about. So once you say you're excited to be here with everybody and you're going to be talking about A, B, and C, then you say, I've divided my time into three main parts. The three main parts are what you've already thought about of what you want people to take away. The first thing is I'm going to be talking about done, done, done. The second one, done, done, done. Third, done, done, done. Do you see? It's just very clear, very concise, and that's it. The next following that, I'm basically sharing with you exactly word by word how I'd want you to start off your presentation. I always encourage people to end with a what I call an aspirational sentence. So this aspirational sentence is my hope is at the end of my talk, everybody here will walk away with a solid understanding, a clear roadmap, whatever that aspiration is. And what I love about this sentence that you add is it gets people to understand, oh, what they're going to get out of it. And then from there, you basically dive into what you're going to be talking about. It's also during this time where if you want to introduce yourself, you absolutely can. If you're talking or you're presenting to people who might not know who you are, this is a good time to do it. This structure that I just shared, how to start off your presentation, it should only take a few minutes. This isn't a whole 10-minute introduction. It's just a few minutes to set the stage. And I use this every single time. And the best part about it is it's those beginning nerves, right? That we talked about earlier. It's like you usually feel those nerves right when you're about to start your presentation, but now you know. Now you have a framework of exactly what to say, and you can use this every single time you're about to start your presentation. Pretty neat, right? All right, let's move on to the third question. And by the way, if you all have any questions for me as I'm going through this, you're like, yeah, wait, actually, I do have a question. Leave it into the chat function and I'll do my best to try to answer it. So, moving on to the third question now. What do I do when someone keeps interjecting me? So I get this question surprisingly pretty often. And I guess it's a little surprising, but also not so surprising. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of us experience this in the workplace, but I think it's the fact that, people reach out asking about how to deal with it that in some ways I'm like, I'm glad we're talking about this because, for me, like I mentioned that I'm pretty introverted, quiet, like, speaking up in meetings or even being the first one to speak up in meetings, like it's hard. It's hard for me. It's definitely gotten better because now I teach communications. But I remember used to feeling like, wow, like, you know, it was already so hard for me to chime in a meeting, but while I'm mid sentence, it's as if somebody will just come in and then be like, "Wait, but this is what I have," or they'll say whatever is on their mind. It's like completely, there's no like filter or no just like they just jump in as if they didn't realize I was talking. And for me, or somebody who, struggled with speaking up even in a meeting, it can really it can really take you back. You're like, "Oh God," like, it's just such an awkward feeling. So the question is, so what do I do when someone keeps interjecting? So I think the key is when you're sharing what's on your mind, right? And what you have to say is important. And someone keeps interjecting. I don't think it's about just acquiescing and just being like, oh, okay, I'm just going to not say anything anymore and just let them take over. I do think there is a level of presence for you to not just continue to talk, right? Like if someone's interjecting, it's not like you just keep talking, right? Otherwise, you both are just talking over each other. It's like you're letting this person say whatever it is that they want to say, but then you acknowledge and being like, you know, John, I hear what you're saying, but let me finish my point real quick and then we'll get to your point. I think saying something like that is a great way to develop that presence, that commanding presence that you weren't shaken by them interjecting. Whether they were doing, I mean, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. It's not that they're doing it maliciously or they're trying to, make you look bad. Sometimes they just like don't know that they're doing it. I mean, sometimes it happens, right? But I do think being able to control the situation, which you can do by saying, again, Susan, I hear what you're saying. So you're acknowledging it. It's not that like you're agreeing. We're not talking about agreeing or not agreeing yet, just acknowledging. Susan, I hear your point, but let me finish my thought quickly and then we can get to what it is that you want to say. And I think oftentimes when people interject, it's sometimes they just want to feel acknowledged and then they can feel like, okay, yeah, no, you're right. Sorry, Jessica, that's right. Please finish your point. At least hopefully that you hope that that's how they'll respond, right? I say if it gets to the point where you do that and this person is just being downright rude, and you know what I mean, right? Like they're just going. Like they don't even like it's just like it almost feels a bit disrespectful, right? I think it's helpful to, and it gets to the point where it's affecting you and it's like affecting your train of thought, your communications. I think it would help to have a one on one meeting, and that's the case. A one on one meeting where you can just share your concerns. But it's not just about saying, like, in a blanket statement, hey, I didn't really like it when you interjected. I think if you really want to give someone that feedback of like how you feel they're communicating and how it's making you feel, you have to be specific. So you have to be able to say, in last week's meeting with A, B, and C, right? You want to be very specific on what's the scenario, what situation you're talking about. When I said this, whatever it is that you're talking about, I felt that you kept interjecting me and it made me feel like, you weren't, listening or acknowledging my point of view. The key here is when you're having this one-on-one conversation to address this, constant interjection, you got to be specific and it's not about like attacking them. You got to be very neutral and matter of fact. It's about letting them know exactly what happened. And again, hopefully they'll get it because sometimes people just don't realize it. So, with this question, what do I do when someone keeps interjecting? I shared those two tips. It's being able to address it on the spot, which I just shared. But if it really gets to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like this person just keeps doing it, they keep doing it in multiple meetings, having that one on one conversation with them and being very specific on when it's happening is very, really important. Otherwise, sometimes like these people, they just don't know, right? Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next question. By the way, I hope you're all finding this very helpful. And I know sometimes, these questions are like, oh, that wasn't a question that I thought of, but I think a lot of these questions, and these are like the most popular questions that we get, these are real life scenarios. Like it happens in the most unexpected places. And it's, when it happens, it's not like you're thinking like, oh, who can I talk to figure this out? So the fact that you're all here, you're listening in, I hope you're finding this like helpful. And, even though you may not be currently, for example, experiencing somebody interjecting in a meeting, if you ever do experience that, now you'll remember, oh, right, that's how I should be handling it. All right. Here's the next question that I want to answer. How do I speak up in meetings if I'm introverted? All right. I love this question because this is very much me. And I think it was that introversion, that shyness of, you know, what do I say? How do I say it? Like, or I just want to like listen first before I say. It's like that introvertedness in me that I think also prevented me from showing up and even building visibility at work. But the one thing about advancing in our career is this: just because we're smart, just because we work hard, it doesn't mean people are going to notice it. I wish this was something that I was taught growing up. I learned this, very quickly on the job, because I remember growing up and I grew up in a very, traditional Asian home where all that was said was you just got to work hard and, don't cause trouble, don't make waves, right? It was like always that being repeated at home, but it was never like, yes, Jessica, you got to work hard and you got to do good work, But at the same time, you actually have to be able to strategically make yourself visible and communicate strategically. Like it was like that second half of advice, which I think is very important. I felt like I missed, and I had to learn it almost haphazardly on the job. And haphazardly because I think it was that introvertedness, it was just like that way of approaching work that I was never taught. So, if you're introverted or you might struggle with a little bit of this, how do you speak up in meetings? So, this is to say, now you know it's important to do so. But it's not about dominating the entire conversation. We're not talking about like you constantly saying and making sure people hear you. I think for people who are introverted, it's about being strategic. It's knowing when to speak up, knowing how to chime in so that people listen, because we know that there are very loud people in perhaps on our team, and you're just like, okay, there he or she goes again, and you're just kind of like, it's almost like their credibility isn't so strong because you're like, this person just talks all the time. That's not good either, right? So I do feel like, being introverted or being on the quieter side, it can be an asset where when you do talk, people are like, oh, whatever Jessica is saying, it must mean something because Jessica doesn't say a lot. But when she does speak, it's actually because she thought about it. It was thoughtful, or there's a reason, right? So you want to give that almost that gravitas of a feeling where everybody is like, oh, let's pay attention. So, what I will say though, if this is something that you really do struggle with, I have found, and this is my own personal advice, and this is what this is how I essentially practiced myself, was if I'm in a meeting and I know it's incredibly important for me to say something, I will challenge, and that's the key. I will challenge myself to try to speak up a little bit earlier in the meeting versus waiting until the very end. And the reason why I do this is because I notice, and this is maybe, a trial and error for you of, your own kind of like sense of what works best. But I've realized that if I wait too long, I might convince myself out of not saying anything at all. And then before you know it, the 30-minute meeting is over and I didn't say a thing. And I'm not even sure people knew I was in the meeting. And then that's not good. Right. And again, it's not about having to, give this like long explanation or it's not like you even have to have the answer to speak up in a meeting. Speaking up in a meeting really is to achieve this. You want people to hear you and see you. And you can do that just by saying, like, even acknowledging other people. Oh my goodness. Ruth, that was a really good suggestion. In fact, it made me think of what we talked about last week. So it's not that you are maybe necessarily offering anything new, but what you are saying is you're connecting the dots between what we're talking about in this meeting with the last meeting. And even just that bit of connection, then that could even be like just a 1 minute addition. They suddenly are like, oh yeah, Ruth said something, or we heard Ruth in that meeting. That's it. And that's the key, because just because you're in a meeting, whether it's with 4, 5, 10 people, you cannot always assume people see you or hear you or even know that you're there unless you say something. So again, my thing is try to speak up sooner rather than later, and don't put so much pressure on yourself of being like, it has to be the most profound idea in order for me to be able to say something. Sometimes just agreeing, acknowledging, connecting the dots for people, these are very strategic and, you know, honestly, really good ways for people just to hear your voice. And again, this is in person or virtual. And I would even argue I'm still doing a lot of virtual meetings. I think many of us still are if we're working remote, or even if we're in the office, maybe we're still getting on virtual calls. I argue it's even more important to do so because when we're not in the room with others and we're just in a, Zoom or a Teams where it's just like, boxes, it's even more important for you to build that visibility. Otherwise, they don't even see you and they don't even hear you. Then it's kind of like that human nature of out of sight, out of mind. And when we think about speaking up in meetings, ultimately, again, it's about building visibility. So, hopefully, this was helpful. And if this is something that you struggle with, or you sometimes even feel like that sense of doubt of like, does what I have to say matter? Yes, it matters. You got to say something and don't put so much pressure on it having to be like necessarily the most amazing, profound thing. It's just speaking up. All right, let's move on. Here's the next question that I'm very excited to get into. This one is, what is the best way to ask for something at work? So I know right now, well, I guess it depends on the organization. I think a lot of people are having like, mid-year reviews, or maybe you all just ended your performance review. I mean, I guess it kind of is different for different organizations, but oftentimes it's during this period of time where people are like, ooh, now it's time to maybe ask for that promotion or maybe ask for that raise, right? Because again, what we quickly realize is just because we're smart or doing good work, it doesn't mean people are going to recognize it. Sometimes we have to be very explicit with asking for what we want. I think back to, again, the way I was raised, and it was almost, and by the way, I'm curious if anyone resonates with this, but it's almost, you know, this mindset of if you just work hard, promotions will happen or people will just recognize it. It was almost as if it was just like it would happen automatically. And I think for many of us, when we get into the working world, we realize maybe early on it's like that. But once you start working for maybe a few more years and you have the aspirations to rise up even more, it's actually the people who, number one, they ask for what they want, they follow up, and they keep fighting for it if they really want it. They also carve out opportunities for themselves that might not be something that's on paper. You know what I mean, right? You think back to like when you first apply for a job and it's like a very detailed job description. And when you're hired, your manager's telling you that this is the project you're going to be working on, or these are the things, the objectives, right? And for the most part, you understand when you first are working. But after a while, you're like, wait a second, I have more aspirations for myself that might not necessarily be on my job description, or it might not even be like something that they even initially or even want me to do, but I'm interested in it, right? So if you know this, right? Because sometimes job descriptions are just job descriptions, right? But sometimes if you're like, I want to grow in this one area, but it's not necessarily like black and white. You sometimes kind of have to create it yourself. What do you have to do? You got to ask for it. But here's the thing. We're talking about the best way to ask for something at work. Because what I have found is if you want something, it's not just about like asking for it. Yes, that's step one and having that courage, but it's really understanding when you ask for what you want, whatever that is, it's not about you asking for it from your point of view. It's asking for it from the other person's point of view. What does that even mean? It means that if you want that yes, you have to be able to show very quickly and very early why the other person should care. Typically, the other person will care if you can talk about the value it'll bring to the team, to the organization. Because oftentimes, let's say, like if you're trying to pitch a new idea that might seem very novel, very new, your manager might be like, well, yeah, I can see why it's a good idea, Jessica, right? They might say that, but how are you going to have the time? Or I don't know how we're going to balance this. Or they might even say things like, well, if you need some budget or resources for that, we can't provide that, right? I know that's always a very common thing. So, in order for you to really make a strong case for your ask, you have to almost predict and anticipate what are the things that they care about and how can you already have the answers to some of their concerns ahead of time. This is what I call strategic communications. And it's not just about like, let me just tell you what I want, or let me just ask you for what I want. It's really understanding how can you make it relevant? How can you make it timely? How can you make it so that they understand the value of it quickly? This is for promotions, projects you're on. And again, it's not assuming that things are just always going to be handed to you, you have to be able to constantly think about, all right, I know I want this. I care about this. I know I deserve it, right? If it's a promotion or a raise. And not only that, having the evidence to show why you're asking for this or why it is that you feel like you deserve that 10% raise or whatever, right? Okay, the best way to ask for something. This goes into my next question, which is very relevant to this question. And it's this one here. Well, I've asked for something, but how many times should I actually follow up? I think for many of us, asking for something is already hard enough. I know for me, I used to be like, well, I don't want to bother this person. Am I going to come off as too much? Am I going to come off I was creating this narrative in my own head of like, is it okay? Is it going to be bad? Are they going to think of me in a different way? Right? Like I was like kind of going down this rabbit hole of negativity. But what I realized is when it comes to following up, you care about it the most out of anybody else. So there's no one better to follow up than you. And instead of assuming the worst, like, and that was me by default, like assuming the worst was going to happen, it's almost pivoting and reframing, which is saying, wait a second, maybe if I follow up, it's not that they're going to see me as pushy or anything. They might see my follow up as a, thank you for reminding me. Sorry, I've been busy. I haven't thought about it, right? They might actually appreciate it because they're busy. Or the second positive possibility is they might go, wow, I can tell Jessica really cares about this. None of that would happen though if you just asked once. So, really, the key is I want you to get into the mindset of you got to say it twice. And saying it twice means, saying it one time, when you're making that ask, and maybe even reiterating it in that same conversation so they get it. But the follow up is again knowing that oftentimes you got to say it twice and maybe even a third time. And I feel like just having that in your mind and almost having the expectation to follow up, like knowing you got to follow up, it can take a lot of like that anxiousness out of it. It's kind of like, for us, the work that we work with a lot of organizations and we come in and we do communications training for engineering teams, sales teams. Like that's the work that we do here at Soulcast Media. And I know when we are in communications with them via email, these folks are busy. Like I know people are busy. Everybody is busy. But me following up with them is me knowing it's just a part of the process. So this is to say, I cannot give I can't quantify, you must follow up 3 times. It's really just knowing that following up is part of asking for what you want and it should be expected. But the key here is it's not about following up in a way where it's like, by the way, do you remember what I asked? Or, by the way, have you thought about this? Right? It's not necessarily that. It's making sure that when you do follow up, maybe offering something new, offering a new point, maybe sharing an article that proves why what you're asking for is valid, right? It's just thinking about how can you continue to offer new information, timely information, so that the follow-up isn't always exactly the same way, but it's still in line with what you're asking for. So it's funny because like I've actually went through a few questions. Oh my gosh. And I can't believe how much time has passed. Honestly, I'm having a lot of fun answering these questions. But, it's funny when I think about these questions of public speaking, dealing with people who interject with you or speaking up in meetings, because I feel like these are the kinds of questions that I wish I had or I knew or had the answers to early on in my career. Otherwise, I think back to, gosh, all those days of like sitting in meetings and just like questioning. So I hope you're finding this all very, very helpful and just feeling like you have somebody who can kind of give you this advice of, how I approach it. And, as a communications expert, this is what I advise people on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like, I hope you can remember this and apply it in your everyday work. Okay, moving on. How do I make better small talk? This is actually I did a podcast episode recently on all things small talk. It was actually called Master Small Talk at work. By the way, if you're interested in listening to that episode, you can actually just comment small talk here in the chat, and I'll have my colleague DM you, direct message you the podcast link at the end of this. But it's part of our Communicating Confidently podcast. And this was an episode, it was a great episode with my friend Kim, and we were talking about all these strategies of making better small talk. So if you want to listen to it, just write small talk in the chat and we'll be sure to send you it. So, one of my favorite tips that my guest Kim shared, and I wanted to share it here, was for her, she utilizes this strategy called fishing. Yes, like fishing. So, I think for some of us, when we think about engaging in small talk, we get kind of awkward, right? It's like, "Oh, the weather's nice," or, like, "What did you do over the weekend?" And it's kind of like this, like, awkward silence, right? We're just like, "What do we say next?" They're looking at you, you're looking at them, and you're not sure who's supposed to, like, even make the first move, right? So, let's just first set the stage by saying small talk is actually part of business. It's part of business, not in like the sense of like, whether you're in business per se, but it's part of work. And what I mean by that is ultimately at the end of the day, small talk is an opportunity. And that's what I want you to see it as. Small talk is an opportunity for you to get to know somebody else aside from the projects that you're working on, the thing you're going to be talking about in this meeting. The opportunity of small talk is to get to know them on a more human level, a more personal level, and vice versa. It's for them to get to know you. I know a lot of us, I mean, most of us have jobs. We know we go, we work, and hopefully most of us like our work. But at the end of the day, work is work. Like, we do it, hopefully we like it, we find it fulfilling, but it's just a part of us. We are many things outside of work, family, friends, hobbies, our community, right? Like, hopefully, I mean, not hopefully, but I mean, again, work is just a part of us. So, small talk is an opportunity for you to share something that you are excited about. And it can be as simple as what amazing thing did you eat over the weekend? Or what trip do you have planned, or what trip did you just come back from? Like for me, we were, my family and I, we were just in Japan recently, and it was, we were there to try to see the cherry blossoms, and we missed it. We got there too early because I think it's quite cold in Japan, or it was cold in Japan while we were there, and basically it blossomed a little bit too late, so we missed it. But anyways, the point of the conversation is, well, now you know. I was in Japan recently, and maybe you have some thoughts about that, right? Maybe it's a country you want to visit, or maybe you were there recently, right? But now you know. Yes, Jessica, she talks about communications, but Jessica traveled to Asia recently, right? So it's like you kind of now have a little bit of interesting insight about me. Same for you. How can you share something about yourself? So going back to fishing, so that's exactly the mindset and the approach. You engage in small talk to fish for information so that you can get to know other people. And when people share something about themselves to you, you take that piece of information, that little nugget, right? Whether it was food, travel, those are all very universal topics, by the way, which I think are always safe. People always got an opinion, or a show, you're watching. Like I think I was talking to, we were having a meeting, and like one of the questions was, what's everyone watching right now? Right. And even though it might not be a show you watch, you can remember and being like, "Oh, um, Alan, he just finished watching Three Body Problems," right? Like now you know, and then maybe you can follow up with that next time. But it's just locking away that information in your mind so that the next time you see somebody, you can follow up. Here's a story that I want to share that kind of like really solidifies this. Recently, I had a meeting with somebody who I was very excited to meet. She was actually a fellow author, and I've loved her books. And we just happened to be able to get lunch together. And I was so excited. This was on a business trip I was on recently. And she was telling me that she's a huge baseball fan, but specifically, she really liked this one Japanese player who plays in LA. And I'll say I'm not a huge like sports person, but as she was talking about that, I locked that I locked that away in my head. Oh, she really likes this player, meaning she must follow his news a lot. She's probably like, on top of like what's going on. So, in order for me to try to continue conversation with her, after this lunch meeting, right? It's not just like having a one time meeting. It's how can you continue to build connections with them afterwards. Sometimes, and this is even now, I'll just randomly, text her and being like, hey, did you see this article about this player? Or did you hear about what happened here? And suddenly we again had something to talk about. And what happened? Staying top of mind, being visible. And even though it wasn't something that I naturally could really engage in a deep conversation, I knew and I know that this is something that she cares about. And that's what small talk is. It's an opportunity to build connections with people and just have something interesting to talk about outside of work. Okay. So we're nearing the end of this, and I can't believe it because I'm actually having quite a lot of fun just engaging with you all here. But let me just share the last question that I have. This is, what is the best way to improve my communications? So I will say communications is one of those skills that I think for many of us, we weren't naturally born. There are definitely some people who are like natural born communicators. That was not me. I think impromptu communications, being good at public speaking, you know, engaging in small talk. These are all communication skills that I had to learn myself. And I will say, once you learn communications and how to do it better, you'll be able to walk into any situation, any environment with any sort of people. And instead of feeling anxious or wondering how do you carry yourself or how do you act, I think it's a sense of confidence of knowing what to say and how to say it. But the thing is, you got to learn it if that's not something that comes naturally to you. And I always say, I'm living proof of that. I always wish I had like a video of me. Actually, maybe I should search for that. A video of me like awkwardly, just like, being like, stumbling, mumbling, whatever. And I wish I could just show it to you all because, even though I'm here and I hosted this entire live, engaging this conversation with you, it wasn't always this way. But this is to say, you can improve your communications. There are many ways to do it. So obviously, I mean, here at Soulcast Media, that's what we do, and we offer many e-courses and different ways of learning. So yes, you can check out our e-courses. I'm a LinkedIn Learning instructor. So if you have access to LinkedIn Learning through your organization, or I think you can buy it a la carte too, you can just type in my name, Jessica Chen, and you can find I have 12 of them here on LinkedIn Learning. But if you don't use LinkedIn Learning, just go to our website, soulcastmedia.com, because that is where you can have access to some of our very popular courses like presentation skills, communicating as a new manager. And I think that's a great place to start. One other way to start is actually, I'm going to pull it up right here, is just identifying your strength. And so this is actually a quiz that we have on our website. And it's a fun quiz. It's only like 2 minutes long, but it allows you to find what do you tend to gravitate towards when it comes to your communication style. Do you tend to be a verbal communicator, nonverbal, a written communicator? And the idea with this really fun quiz that we put together is depending on your strength, we offer tips on how to improve in other areas. So I think a lot of you have taken this quiz, but if you've not taken this quiz, just kind of bookmark this soulcastmedia.com/quiz because it's a great place to start. It's free. Like, I mean, the tips that we give here is also free too. So it's just a great way for you to keep this top of mind. Also, I host these lives every other week or so. That's kind of our cadence and schedule. If you love this, because I always talk about all things communications and career, this is the QR code on your screen, or you just go to soulcastmedia.com/events and you'll get notified of every single event coming up. And let me tell you, we have some very awesome ones coming up. Part of the reason why we have some very cool ones coming up is because I have a book coming out this summer. We're less than 3 months away. The book is called Smart Not Loud, and we're doing some special communications workshops and events and even exclusive private events for folks who order the book. So, if you are interested, and we're slowly now starting to talk about it, but if you're interested in checking out this book, you can actually start to pre-order it. And if you pre-order it, you actually get access to some amazing bonuses And we just put this in yesterday, so I guess I can say it now. But if you want a first edition signed copy, it's available for you to pre-order right now. You just got to go to soulcastmedia.com/book, and that'll basically keep you updated on all things smart, not loud. Did you have fun? I hope you had fun. And, thank you all for staying on. And I know this wasn't the initial session that we had planned, but I really wanted to continue on. I know you all carved out your time to learn all things communication. So I really wanted to, again, make this a very fruitful session for you. So if you listened, you loved it, you want to rewatch it, this is all going to eventually be on our podcast, which is Communicating Confidently with Jessica Chen. So you can listen to this anytime you want again. And if you didn't get to take down notes, you can feel free to rewatch this. This is here for you. So, like I said, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. We have another event. We have actually several events coming up in the coming weeks. But again, to get notified of that, just make sure you scan the QR code, make sure you're in our email list, because that is the way that we communicate with you all. And hey, if there is an event that you're like, I want to do that one, just RSVP for that one. But we'll basically send you everything and you have options. You just let us know if you want to come and join and attend. But they're always like this, very tactical. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm so honored that you got to spend, whether it was your morning or afternoon with me. And I hope to talk to you all soon. And take care, and be sure to check out the book, Smart Not Loud. You can even just type those words in, Smart Not Loud book, on Google or whatever, and they'll take you to it. And you can learn more about the book. And I'm going to be sharing a lot more details about it in the coming weeks or so. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody. And I hopefully will see you soon in our upcoming events as well. Okay. Take care, everybody.